Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, while beautiful, it holds a complex and painful legacy. It's something to hear the story, but to personally explore and experience how the enslaved individuals who once called this place home lived is something entirely different. The stories, often overshadowed by the grandeur of this estate, will live, if but for a moment, in this rooted in SC, sleeping with the ancestors. Magnolia Plantation. Its entryway lined with Virginia live oaks, their trunks in the foliage below, camouflaging swampland on either side. 4 hours from sunset, what's left of the day's light impeded by a haunting yet welcoming leafy canopy. The 400 acres of land along South Carolina Highway 61 was acquired in the late 17th century and became home to the Drayton family and home to the enslaved who worked its rice fields, house, and gardens by day. Drayton Hall was used as the base of operations to manage their other properties, including Magnolia and its enslaved.
Magnolia is one of the first tourist attractions. One of the most important things that I think that I try to convey as director of interpretation here is that history is both and. Recognizing the trauma and the powerful pain that occurred here as a site of enslavement, that painful past that we know exists, but also the and is that and people lived here.
Daily tours offer a chance to hear the oral history of the enslaved at Magnolia.
They just got old newspapers and pasted the walls and the ceilings.
And of those who chose to remain, even after their freedom was declared.
How was the decision made for those who had been enslaved to then stay at Magnolia? We know that some left, but then others stayed and continued to work on the property and work in the gardens.
Visitors every so often get the opportunity to experience what life was like here on the grounds, thanks to special programming like Living Legacies.
You have to take all the salt.
With history lessons.
They learn to speak 7 different languages.
Right.
So when you start getting all that and getting it stirred up, that's how you come up with Gullah Geechee, because there's a lot of broken language. Right.
Food demonstrations, bricklaying, and storytellers.
It got a door on the front of it that open up.
Taking people back in time.
Life sometimes get real scary. Especially when you done lived the life that I done lived growing up. When you ain't got no control of even your own being.
Joe McGill, a former park ranger at Fort Sumter, a Civil War reenactor, and former history consultant for Magnolia Plantation and Gardens.
To have such a diverse audience here on a plantation to take in what we have to offer. And what we have to offer is the lives of the enslaved people. We want people visiting plantations to know that it's more to a plantation than just a beautiful big house that most people come to see. It's the people who made that nice, beautiful big house possible, whose labor was stolen to make it all possible. So we tell those stories.
It's those stories that McGill has taken a step further.
Walk through these cabins, feel these cabins, and if you really want to accept the challenge, find out when we'll be sleeping in these cabins again. If you guys want to spend the night in these cabins, we can make it happen.
And made possible through the Slave Dwelling Project.
Tourist attraction.
People spend the night in extant or still existing slave dwellings. As its executive director, McGill is passionate about their history and preservation.
In an attempt to bring attention to these spaces and our enslaved ancestors. What started out as a quest to sleep in slave dwellings 1 year is now 14 years old, 25 states later, and the District of Columbia.
The experience led to the writing and publishing of Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Followed the Footprints of Slavery, a book co-written with journalist Herb Frazier.
Joe would write a 500-word blog after his initial cabin stays, many of which he did by himself. But as other people joined him in his travels around South Carolina and around the country, they too wrote about their experiences. So we took this collection of blogs And then we built around that the voices of the enslaved, because the enslaved at that time, when they were enslaved, their voices were muted. So we added that, and we added the history of some of the sites that he had visited. And we came up with some incredible stories that are in this book.
There's also a version of Sleeping with the Ancestors that includes a study guide for teachers and students.
It's because this is a history that young people need to know.
McGill says it's the young people, the next generation, that will continue to be the storytellers.
I know we as adults poo-poo TikTok, but that has value also. If we want to get these kids involved, we got to go to where they are. We got to use the methods that they use to intake their information. We have to get these kids over to events like this. Once we get them here, they like it, but we got to get them here.
Here on Magnolia, where the enslaved lived, died, and were buried.
And one of the things that you look for are sort of indentions in the ground, because that's where, when people would be buried in a wooden pine box, then that wood rots and the earth sinks.
While there are visual reminders of those who passed on centuries ago, life continues through the wildlife on Magnolia. A great blue heron. You got it. Searching for the best branch to take back to help build his family's nest, providing with what's available on the land, just like the many enslaved who lived on Magnolia. The call and response of birds over the drone of the nearby highway reminds us of the present, while there's so many more memories of the past to be explored. Daylight is beginning to fade over Magnolia. As a late evening cacophony of creatures are warming up for their nightly concert, the beginnings of a fire. Chairs arranged in a circle. In preparation for supper and campfire conversations with our guests, all part of the slave dwelling experience.
I call myself a cultural and systems historian.
Guests like Easta Clark.
So how did you get involved with history? I love your laugh.
It's in my blood and in my bones.
Through his work with Magnolia Plantation on James Island, Clark understands the importance of the project.
There are many former slave dwellings in the area that are called dependencies now, that are called carriage houses now, that are called, those kinds of aspects. And there's a lot of loss because words have power.
By nightfall, the circle has been completed. Around the campfire, Rodney Prelo, reenactor and bricklayer.
And I'm a local, I'm from James Island.
President and CEO of the Preservation Society of Charleston, Brian Turner.
The ability to teach people and understand history.
Renowned sweetgrass basket weaver, Corey Alston.
Has kept this skill alive, passing from mother to daughter.
Retired airman and woodworker, Justin Dargis.
Look beautiful and bring out that inner beauty.
Marcus McCoy, a truck driver.
Had no experience like this before to be around something that's for heritage.
My son James.
She just told me what she was doing, and I kind of invited myself.
Longshoreman Don Holloway.
And like I said, it's my first time ever meet you, Miss Tuff, so glad to meet you too.
And chef and author Kevin Williams.
Stand in his shoes and recreate that dinner.
A diverse group indeed, with a common denominator. Thank you again for being here. A desire to connect, to understand history, and to honor the lives of the enslaved that lived just yards away from where we were gathered.
And these cabins are 4 out of 11 that we know existed in the 1850 census.
By now, it's the end of the day for most of our guests, and we could use a meal. As part of the immersive experience, it was important to include every aspect of what life was like for the enslaved. That includes the food the ancestors would eat after working tirelessly from sunup to sundown.
After toiling in the fields, this was a meal of substance. It would be able to give them energy to continue on, picking cotton or raising rice or whatever they were doing at specific plantations.
The project needed someone who not only could provide insight into the meals, but also someone who could prepare it. That's where Chef Kevin Mitchell comes in.
And then there's some other ingredients that a lot of times people don't necessarily associate with being from this area.
Chef Kevin says the enslaved were usually given just one pot to cook in, and it was common for supper to consist of one-pot meals.
This meal would have been very important for them.
Enough to feed their families and other enslaved on the plantation.
The rice would have been prosperity, the greens, right, paper money, right, and that's what you were hoping to usher into your new year by eating this food.
But not before we join hands.
Amen. Amen.
Then dinner is served. Many of us with the luxury of going back for seconds, even thirds. Something that the enslaved ancestors may not have been able to do because of the number that needed to be fed. Good food with a side of good conversation. History, race relations, a melding of thoughts and opinions served as a bittersweet dessert. Questions asked and answered. A mutual respect and understanding of where things were then and where things are now.
Hearing and understanding the stories of lived experience from people who are different from yourselves, who grew up in a different world.
Serving as a reminder.
We all come from different places. We all have different stories to share, and so sometimes you need to push to be exposed to people who have a different upbringing, different background, in order to understand and have empathy for others' experiences.
Thank you for inviting me, Joe.
For Corey Alston, it's an experience for the collective.
This experience isn't a black experience. This is an American experience, And so, as I word it that way, is because they could be white families that need to try this, black families that need to experience this, and then as we're in the midst of doing it, or maybe afterwards, let's have conversation. Or what do we grow from? What do we learn from?
The same rings true for Rodney Prelo.
But 9 times out of 10, if they're glad, and you say Grimble Road and
Barnhill, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Whom I may or may not be related to.
I thought it was very interesting and very, very enlightening and very open.
Prelo's European ancestors once owned the Charleston market downtown. Through his involvement with the Slave Dwelling Project, he was able to gain more knowledge of his own history.
On the Prelo plantation, they were one of the 9 plantations that made bricks to build to Charleston, buildings in Charleston, even for bricks to be as the baluster of ships as they ship these stuff up. And the most important one is that they made the bricks. They were one of the 9 different plantations that made 1 million bricks to build Fort Sumter.
Like his father and his father before him and his father before him, Prelo is carrying on that legacy.
I teach my son and my daughter about it, and my son, he takes up the trade now. So it's passing on the generation trade and also the knowledge.
And it's that knowledge we are seeing through the Slave Dwelling Project as we prepare to spend the night with the ancestors. Before dinner, Herb Frazier was the first to scope out which slave dwelling he would use to lay his head. With no electricity, a simple flashlight will have to be enough to ward off darkness as he sets up a more modern pallet with the closest comfort of home.
They didn't have this back then, but we got it now, so I'm going to use it.
By now, we're all moving along open land with the aid of the flashlight on our cell phones. Brian is no stranger to camping out and once spent the night at Alcatraz. He finds a space to himself.
I did bring it. You need that chair.
And starts to take inventory of what he'll need to weather the cold night ahead.
Bring a friend.
He looks to be well prepared.
Oh, we're just going to go see the sleeping quarters for tonight.
Meanwhile, in the next cabin over, where I will spend the night with my son and his girlfriend, Sarah. Once I started getting into my own genealogy and finding out that I had a lot of mulatto ancestors, which we know what that meant, and that they were enslaved, and knowing that my third great-grandfather actually was part of a Middleton plantation, one of the brothers down in Beaufort County, and just knowing that my ancestors lived that, there's something that I really couldn't ignore. And this kind of, I think, and even for the ancestors that I didn't know that were enslaved, this is a way for me to kind of reach back and connect with them and let them know that they're not forgotten, and what they went through is not forgotten, and that they have a great granddaughter here who cares deeply about what their journey was like and wanted to experience that for herself. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just kind of thinking that my ancestors are here with me, and I'm going to tell them good night, and I am going to sleep well, and I hope they think that that's our girl. That's what we could have become. That is what we have produced. That is what our pain and our hurt, and even some of our joys, and even in the good times, has translated into. So I'm just gonna get my blankets here and get ready to kind of hunker down with about 5 layers, because I really need that to sleep, and just kind of get ready and sleep with my ancestors and have sweet dreams, and that's that.
So we did it. And here's the thing, if you'd have told me that sleeping in a slave dwelling was going to be on my bucket list, I probably would have said, I don't see that happening. But that unforeseen item that was added to my list has proven to be an experience of a lifetime. From the very moment of driving onto Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, for whatever reason, I could feel my heart quicken. I could feel the pace of it. I felt almost a little anxious. But instead of feeling what, through my conversation with other people, may have been, oh, it's a scary feeling, or it's an eerie feeling, or it's all the souls that are there, I tried to look at it in a more positive sense, in that these were the ancestors who once lived here at Magnolia. That was their way of recognizing my presence here to tell their story. Now, spending the whole afternoon out at Magnolia, I literally felt like I was being transported. I felt like I was seeing the background, or the behind the scenes, if you will, because I have a very imaginative mind, and where things play out in my head, sort of like a movie. So as I was walking through the grounds in this area behind me, and even down the trail to see the wildlife, I was just imagining and what a day would have been like, of course, with the enslaved toiling, from sun up, literally, to sundown. And I felt safe here. I did not feel any ominous spirits. The first thing someone is asked, well, did you hear anything? Did you see anything that may have given you any pause whatsoever? And I would have to say no. But as the sun began to set and things quieted down, and more of the sounds of the wildlife came to be to let us know that another day was indeed setting, our guests started to arrive. And that was really exciting as I sat back and realized that in this particular space, at that particular time, that night, I was with some heavy hitters. I was with people who knew their stuff, who knew their American history, who knew the South Carolina history, who knew Gullah history. And I was just floored by the magnitude of their presence being here. And I was happy to be in a space with them. And as we slept that night, I wouldn't even say that we really slept. It was cold. And I can only imagine being an enslaved and living during that time, what that could have been like. And we had some comforts of home. You know, I had an air mattress, my son and his girlfriend. They had sleeping bags, and we had endless amount of blankets and quilts to keep us warm. But we didn't sleep through the night. We were hyper aware and hyper sensitive to the sounds outside. We could hear the owls hooting. We could hear the crickets. We could hear the frogs. We could hear the nightlife moving around. And we just really wanted to experience that. And that we did. And I'd have to say that if you ever get the opportunity to do this through the Slave Dwelling Project, understand what Corey Alston once said. What he said in this special tonight was that this is not just Black history. It is American history. And it's something for the entire family to experience. And you should through the Slave Dwelling Project. It is quite the experience. And if I could do it again, I would. And these are just one of the many stories that are found right here in the Palmetto State, right here at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, rooted in SC.